Let's talk about censorship, shall we? A very apt topic considering the month we just entered into, where you had best be very careful you don't say anything that might upset or hurt the feelings of protected groups of people. Like, for example, oh, I don't know, keeping a police car in a video game? That might upset certain groups, as they're not very appreciative of the police, frankly, so you best get rid of that to tweet. Just the term too, protected groups. I love it because, well, we used to have a much more fetching and appropriate term for this back in the day. Nobility. But hey, details, details. That is neither here nor there, as the primary topic of today's video is the rather sudden and unexpected about-face from YouTube and Google on their 2020 election integrity policy, which is now gone. Okay. Well, that certainly was sudden and out of the blue, and about 2.5 years too late, really, but okay. So, what were they saying here? We first introduced a provision of our elections misinformation policy focused on the integrity of past US presidential elections in December 2020. That's a pinch misleading right there, because they didn't introduce a provision, they pretty much invented the whole damn thing in 2020. And it wasn't focused on the integrity of past US presidential elections. They weren't going like, oh, you darned people out there questioning the integrity election of the election that elected Lincoln. My brain just short-circuited there for a second. No, it was specifically the Trump-alophagus defeat against Biden, the most popular presidential candidate in American history, of course. You were still allowed to question the integrity of the Clinton versus Trump election, for example. An important caveat there to add in. Once the state's safe harbor date for certification had passed, 2 years, tens of thousands of video removals. Tens of thousands of video removals. And one election cycle later, we recognized it was time to re-evaluate the effects of this policy in today's changed landscape. Oh really? Why now all of a sudden? How very generous of you, YouTube, to change this. Perhaps YouTube sat down around their big evil round table one day and thought to themselves, maybe a private corporation's dictating whether or not you can have an opinion on political matters isn't actually a very good idea in a modern-day democracy, and so decided to remove the rule. Maybe, but not necessarily likely. As they continue on here, the policy had the unintended effect of curtailing political speech. You don't say. Wait, hold on. Let me see if I get this right here. Are you trying to tell me that a terms of service entry that affects only one side of the political spectrum might impede on that side's political free speech? Because that sounds absolutely ridiculous to me, frankly. Absurdity aside, though. So, why are they doing this now? Well, we can see a little bit of it further down here as well. All of our election misinformation policies remain in place. So you are now allowed to say, for example, that the 2020 election was rigged, but you are not allowed to say how. For example, claims that could materially discourage voting, like for example that your vote doesn't matter because the machinery doesn't count it properly, or any disputing the validity of voting by mail, which is still of course sacrosanct. So essentially, you can say that the election is stolen, in theory, but you're not allowed to say how, and you're not allowed to criticize any of the mechanics around the election. That sounds rather pointless at that point, but what this does do is it fixes some of the optics, because one of the Conservatives' best arguments for why the election might have been stolen was not the technical stuff. Because you can go up to a normie and you can show them the technical stuff. You can show them the surveillance counters, you can show them the witness testimonies of many people saying like there are irregularities here, you can look at certain states which went over their limits by absolute ages, you can show them various things that doesn't quite seem to make sense. Not saying that it happened, YouTube, because your rules are still in place on that, just make an example. However, you could go up to a normie and say, okay, I believe the election was stolen. The normie goes, well, why do you believe such a silly conspiracy theory? And then you go, because you're not allowed to talk about it, and then show them the YouTube terms of service saying you're not allowed to talk about it. That, unironically, is something that even a normie will look at and go, oh, yeah, that does sound pretty sus, doesn't it? And of course, because of the bad PR optics, it also gives them good optics to come out now and say, oh, now you're allowed to say it. We're down on the side of free speech now, you see. 2.5 years later. Because of course, anyone who was actually genuinely convinced that the election was stolen, they were convinced of that 2.5 years ago. They're not going to be convinced of that today. You know, it's silly. It allows YouTube to look good whilst not actually sacrificing anything. And I'd like to point out something else as well. In the actual, misinformation policies thing, you will see that they are still forbidding you to talk about the election integrity of other elections. So they haven't actually changed their opinion on whether or not you should be allowed to question the veracity of an election. They've only changed it in this particular regard. Now, why could that be? Well, the aforementioned reason is a big one, in that it sounds really, really bad that you are not allowed to talk about a thing because of a political reason. But it also means that now, well, the next election can be questioned just as much. Because, of course, that one isn't a slam dunk yet. So they're looking at that and going, Biden is very old and he has done a particularly poor job of damn near everything, so maybe we should open up the opportunity for people to question that election ahead of time, just to make sure. I think that, honestly, is a hell of a lot more of a plausible explanation than YouTube suddenly going, this might curtail free speech, which I don't think is much of a concern at YouTube headquarters, honestly. Especially as, again, they don't allow you to talk about other elections, and they don't allow you to actually criticize the mechanics around the elections. I mean, I would recommend Racifist's excellent video on why voting by mail is inherently less secure than voting in person, but, well, that YouTube video no longer exists, of course. Hey. Details, right? And of course, all of the other policies are in place as well. So in my opinion, this is merely opening up the window to criticize the upcoming election from presumably and preferably a left-wing perspective, as if Biden absolutely beats the shit out of the Trump-ophagus or DeSantis or whoever comes out ahead on the Republican side. I'm pretty sure that we will be seeing the reintroduction of this policy very quickly, going like, okay, you know, we allowed you to talk about the previous one, but this one is sacrosanct. And if it does turn out to go in the direction of the Republicans, I am pretty sure that there will be no similar policy instituted in their favor. Perhaps I'm being overly cynical, but somehow I don't really think so. So this is not YouTube doing you a favor, not in the slightest. I do not think this is a lessening of censorship at all. I simply think that this is the company starting to learn from its mistakes and thinking, yeah, it does make us look very bad if we do this, but the immediate political benefits outweigh the immediate PR benefits, especially as we can regain a lot of PR praise later when we lift the restrictions. Going like, oh yeah, no, we wouldn't want to curb free speech now, would we? That would be absolutely terrible. Yes. We'll see about that. We'll very, very much so see about that. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but and this one too. The ability to openly debate political ideas, even those that are controversial or based on disproven assumptions, is core to a functional democratic society, especially in the midst of an election season. Whilst of course maintaining all of their policies against hate speech, harassment, and incitement to violence. Now, harassment and violence, fair enough, but hate speech, we know what hate speech means. I got a hate speech strike for criticizing Disney. And controversial political opinions? You try making a pro-Nazi video on YouTube and see what happens. Hell, you try and make a pro-conservative video on YouTube and you see what happens. YouTube is not a free speech platform. I don't think it ever has been, and it certainly isn't today, because of this meaningless loosening of 2.5-year-old restrictions that have long since done everything in their power to screw one side over. Again, this is not YouTube doing you a favor, this is simply YouTube getting smarter at how to suppress anything and everything it wants to. That, at least, is my opinion, and it's a bit of a worrying one because if the corporations are actually starting to learn how to be better censors, well, they've shown plenty of, go-getter attitude and passion for the art so far, but now that they're actually beginning to demonstrate a certain degree of intelligence as well, that's hardly a good thing for the rest of us, in my opinion. Anywho, until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.